Hello, my friend. I'm John Stambaugh, a filmmaker and Super 8 user.
And I'm Evan Schneider. I'm a DP and a Hollywood colorist, and this is the Fake 8 Film Lab.
In this video, we are going to give you a quick breakdown of what this product is, why we made it, and a tutorial on how to use it. Let's start with why we made this product, because we have all seen that there are a lot of Super 8 assets that exist on the internet, whether it's the border overlays or 8mm grain, you name it, we've all seen it, and there's a lot out there. Evan and I both love Super 8mm footage, but let's face it, it's continuing to get more expensive, and on some projects, it's just too time consuming. So even though we love it so much, it doesn't always work in every project. So we set out to make a realistic, one-click, universal, Fake 8 emulation. So that kind of leads us into the quick breakdown of what we built the product to be. We'll start with it being universal because you may already know that it is a DaVinci Resolve POWERGRADE, and you'll get into more details later on what exactly that means. But when you hear that it's made for DaVinci Resolve, you might wonder how it could be universal. The shortest answer is that DaVinci Resolve is actually a free editing software available to anyone. And our POWERGRADE is built so that it can be used inside of the DaVinci Resolve free version. For anyone using any editing software, they can implement the Fake 8 look that we've generated in DaVinci Resolve into their real workflow. And there are more videos on explaining that, and later in this, you'll start to see how exactly that comes about. But this is how we made it universal. You can use our assets inside of any editing software that you choose, and you can take the grain, you can take the mattes and the overlays, everything that we have made from real Super 8 footage. You can take that and use it in your editing software of choice, but to use the Fake 8 look, you'll be inside of DaVinci Resolve, creating Fake 8 footage, and then importing it into any other project in any other editing software that you want. There will be more about the workflow later on, but that was one of the first elements that we wanted to highlight, is the universal use of our POWERGRADE, even though it's made for DaVinci Resolve. And when we say that it's one click, we also understand that not everyone is a DaVinci Resolve user or editor, but you don't have to be in order to use this, because it's very easy for you to get really realistic Super 8 fake footage in just a few clicks, not one click, but a few clicks inside of DaVinci Resolve, even if you've never edited using the software. And finally, we set out to make it realistic. So after compiling a ton of matching Super 8 footage with digital footage right next to each other, we went through meticulously to perfect a Fake 8 look that emulated Super 8 as close as we could possibly get it.
Some of my favorite features of this POWERGRADE is the real grain and the jitter that we added. We also added a really nice flicker that's inspired by real Super 8 film. We spent a lot of time building out and testing the halation, which is basically where highlights and shadows have higher contrast. On Super 8 film, it's actually kind of a physical thing that happens in the film, in the camera. We also spent a lot of time developing the different styles, and this really makes it feel like a lab instead of a preset where you can choose how you're basically developing your footage and turning it into very stylized and very realistic looking Super 8 footage.
So having shared now a bit about the why we made it and the what exactly it is, let's get into some of the workflow before you start the tutorial with Evan. The reason we built the Fake 8 Film Lab inside of DaVinci Resolve is because as an industry standard color grading software, it has the powerful tools needed to create the most realistic Super 8 fake look, and you can use the free version so that you can create Fake 8 Film Lab footage and then implement that footage into any project that you want, which is why we called it the Film Lab. Just like when you're recording real Super 8 footage, you record it on purpose to be used in a particular project, and you ship it off to a lab, and then you get back from the lab your film results. And then you edit those film results into your chosen project, or you leave them as a dedicated project and maybe you add music. But the point is, our project is intended to function similarly to a film lab. By designing the workflow just like a real film lab, we have truly made it a universal product, because even as a Premiere or Final Cut editor or any other editing software, you can record, edit, and create your Fake 8 footage and import that footage into any other software that you want and have realistic Super 8 fake footage built in, usable inside of any editor that you want. All right, now that I've gone over the what it is, the why it is, and a quick breakdown on the workflow, I'm gonna hand you over to Evan to show you how to actually use the product and do a quick demo about what exactly this thing really is.
So once you have the Fake 8 Film Lab files completely downloaded to your computer, the first thing you're going to want to do before you start using the presets in DaVinci Resolve is to copy all of the files to a location on your internal hard drive to live forever. The main reason for this is that DaVinci Resolve is actually going to be referencing 4K grain and 4K matte files. So the faster your hard drive speed is, the smoother playback will be in DaVinci Resolve. So for me, I have my Fake 8 Film Lab here, and I've copied it to my movies folder on my hard drive, and this is an internal hard drive on the Mac Studio, so it's extremely fast, and these files will just live here, and DaVinci Resolve can reference them over and over without having to move them. So the beauty of DaVinci Resolve is that there's actually a completely free version and a studio version. Now, one note is that if you are downloading DaVinci Resolve free version for the first time, you want to make sure that you do not download the version from the Mac App Store. You want to download the version from DaVinci Resolve's website, because that is the version that will work best, and the Mac App Store version is missing some features and some functionality. So I would recommend not downloading it from the App Store. So once you have DaVinci Resolve downloaded, you can go ahead and open it. And just to note that these POWERGRADES work in DaVinci Resolve 17 and up. So 17, 17 Studio, 18, and 18 Studio. So we're here in DaVinci Resolve 18. This is the free version that I'm actually demoing it on. And when you see this first page pop up, this is where you keep all of your projects in DaVinci Resolve. If you're completely new to DaVinci Resolve and you want to get a quick overview of how to use everything, then make sure to check out either John or I's YouTube channels, where we go over more in depth about how to get started using DaVinci Resolve. But we're here in the main setup page, and we're just going to create a new project. You can definitely import everything into existing projects and use it, but we actually recommend creating a new project and titling it Fake 8 Film Lab, and creating that and just treating it as a lab. Before we do anything else, we want to set up our project settings to work with Fake 8 Film Lab. So what we're going to do is go to File and then Project Settings. You can also hit Shift 9 to get there quicker. And we're going to leave our timeline resolution at 1920 by 1080 HD. So the reason that you want your timeline to be 1920 by 1080 HD while you're working is that you're going to get smoother playback, and you can actually play back in real time on most Mac computers. And then when you export, going to Ultra HD, make sure you get that extra quality. We can always change to Ultra HD 4K later when we export if we want. And then we're going to change our timeline frame rate to 18 frames per second. And we're going to type in our playback frame rate, also 18 frames per second. This is the normal frame rate for Super 8 film. So we want to make sure if we're emulating it properly, we want to make sure the timeline frame rate is 18 frames per second. The next thing we want to do is go to image scaling, and under input scaling, we want to change this mismatched resolution files to scale full frame with crop. This will make sure that the overlays and the grain will all line up properly. And also when we scale it to Ultra HD on export, everything will stay perfectly aligned. The last thing you can do is go to your color management and make sure your color science is on DaVinci YRGB. And if you're on a Mac, then I would go for Rec 709A and change your output color space to same as timeline. This will make sure that you don't have any gamma shifts or color shifts when you export the files. So now that we have all of our settings properly set, we can hit save, and then we are going to go to the media page. And yes, you have to do this next step in the media page. So the next thing we want to do is import our mattes and our grain. So to do this, we have to do a bit of a different technique than just dragging and dropping them in, because we want DaVinci to recognize them as mattes. So what we're going to do is we're going to stay very organized as we do this, and we're going to create a new bin, and we're going to call it mattes and grain. And we're going to double click into that, make sure we're highlighted. And then you're going to go to where you copied the files permanently. So for me, I have them in my movies folder. I'm going to go to Fake 8 Film Lab, and then I'm going to double click on mattes. And you can see here are all of my mattes, and I'm going to highlight all of them, right click, and add to media pool as a matte. There we go. And then we're going to go down to grain, select both of those, and we're going to do the same thing, add to media pool as matte. So you can see here, we know that these are mattes in DaVinci Resolve because they have this icon down here, the rectangle with the circle in the middle. So that's how we know that DaVinci recognizes those as mattes, and they'll work properly with the POWERGRADE. One note, you don't necessarily have to put them in a folder called mattes and grain. You can put them in the master folder. The only thing that you need to make sure is that they're imported as mattes, but we like to stay organized, so we're going to put them in their own folder. The next thing that we want to do is to import our overlays into the project. We don't need to import these as mattes, but we do want to stay organized, so I'm going to create a new bin called overlays, and then I'm going to create one more bin called sound effects. I'm going to go to my overlays, and I'm just going to import these 3 folders. So highlight them, right click, and then add folder and subfolders into media pool. So now we have our leaders, our overlays, and our tails. And then we're going to go to sound effects, and we're just going to right click on the sound effects folder and add folder and subfolders into media pool. Now we have all of our sound effects, we have our overlays, mattes and grain, and now we're ready to import the POWERGRADES. So to do this, we are going to go over to the color page in DaVinci Resolve. If this is your first time opening and using DaVinci Resolve, in the color page, you have a tab called Gallery. This is where your stills and your POWERGRADES are stored. So to import the Fake 8 Film Lab POWERGRADES, what you want to do is you want to open the side tab. So we're going to click on this button up here, and you'll see Stills and POWERGRADE. So POWERGRADES are cool because once you import POWERGRADES into DaVinci Resolve, you can access them on any project that you open. Whereas the stills are only accessible within the current project. So we are going to click on the POWERGRADE window, and we're just going to double click it, and we're going to rename it Fake 8 Film Lab. All right, so now I can simply go to my movies folder, go to Fake 8 Film Lab and POWERGRADES, and I can just simply select all of these, drag them into my POWERGRADE album, and they should import automatically. So now I can close this tab, and you can see I have all of my Fake 8 Film Lab POWERGRADES imported. So the first thing you'll notice when you import the POWERGRADES is that they're organized by overscan, cropped, and full aperture. Basically, these correlate to the way that Super 8 footage is scanned in real life. And so overscan means that you can see a little bit more of the top and bottom, and you can actually see the previous frame and the next frame on the top and bottom. Cropped basically means that it's cropped in so you can see the current frame, but you can't see the top or bottom. And then full aperture is actually a high resolution 4K scan. it's almost in 4:3 resolution, and you can see about half of the top frame, half of the bottom frame, and the full middle frame. This is a really cool aesthetic, and you may enjoy it. We have an advanced tutorial. In that tutorial, we go over how to set up a timeline for the full aperture presets. But if this is your first time and you're only using a HD or Ultra HD timeline, then you can stick to the overscan versions and the cropped versions. Then within those, we used 3 cameras to capture different mats. And so they're organized by Canon 310 XL, Canon 814 XL, and Minolta AutoPack. And so basically there's 3 versions of each camera that you can use, and I'll show you how they differ from each other. All right, so now that we have the Fake 8 Film Lab power grades and assets properly imported into our project that is set up perfectly, we can finally get to putting together a timeline to apply the Fake 8 Film Lab to our footage. So to do that, we're actually going to go to the Edit tab, and I'm going to create a new bin in the master folder, and I'm just going to call it Footage. And so in this folder, I'm going to import my footage, and I actually have a few clips already set up here. So I'm just going to drag and drop my footage into that folder. You can either drag it from Finder, or you can use the media page to import whatever footage you want. So basically the idea here is to create a sequence that kind of acts like a raw roll of film. So it's up to you. You can either drag in the clips that you want to convert to Super 8, or you can take selects of the different shots that you want to convert and then put them in the sequence. But we would recommend treating this as a film lab. So it's a lot easier to do this and then export a file and then import that into a current project to use and edit, instead of incorporating this into a current timeline or project and then going through and doing each clip individually. So with this footage, I'm just going to drag and drop it into my sequence as the full clips, and I'm just going to get the timeline set up for applying our Super 8 presets. All right, so now that we have our timeline set up with all of our footage, we are ready to go back to the color page to start applying the power grades. So we're back in the color page, and if you click on clips here, you can actually see all of the different clips in our timeline, but I'm just going to hide that for now. So basically all you have to do to apply a power grade to a clip is to right click on the power grade thumbnail and then click apply grade. And instantly you can see that it's created an entire node tree over here on the right side, and we have a really great looking Super 8 emulation applied to your footage. So right off the bat, we can literally just scrub around. We can actually play it back and see how it looks. The cool thing about this is that it's referencing real grain scans and real mats on this footage to create the Super 8 look. And you can see here that this is the overscan version, so you can see the bottom of the previous frame and the top of the next frame as it's playing back. If you look over here on the node tree, you can see that it's organized by colors. So basically in the node tree, anything that is labeled with a green color means that that is user adjustable. The blue only needs to be adjusted if needed, so that's your log conversion and your log offset. And then the orange nodes with the lock symbol mean that you shouldn't have to touch it at all. And these are basically the under the hood adjustments that make it all work. So if you want to preview what each different power grade looks like, all you have to do is right click. If I want to see what the Canon 814 XL overscan looks like, I can just right click and apply grade, and it'll overwrite all of the node tree. I can do the same for the Minolta AutoPack. You can see here that the mat changed and the node tree still has the same structure as before. I'll also do it with the cropped versions. So we have Canon 310 XL, Canon 814 XL, and then Minolta AutoPack cropped. So basically this is missing the top and bottom, and it's just cropped to the current frame. So for this demo, I'm going to go to the Canon 310 XL. That's probably my favorite overscan version. It's just classic Super 8. This clip was shot on the Fuji X-T4 in classic chrome. So since this is a Rec 709 profile, we don't need to convert from log to Rec 709. I'll show you how to do that in future clips, but nodes 2 and 3 are basically for converting log to Rec 709. So we can jump right to the correction node. So this node is where you can make any corrections to the footage that you might need. I would recommend in this node using the temperature, tint, sliders, as well as the lift gamma gain wheels. So in this clip, maybe I think it's a little too bright. So I can bring down the gamma and make it a little bit darker and possibly warm the footage up a little bit using the temperature slider. So you can see here that I've made some slight adjustments. This is before and this is after. And so if you want, you don't have to make corrections, but you can. And if you do, you can do it in that node right there. The next node is a technical node, and it's a compound node that you don't need to touch, so don't worry about that at all. Now, let's look at this big stack of nodes right here. So basically this stack of nodes is a bunch of options for stylistic additions to your footage. So we've created some preset looks that are reminiscent and inspired by Super 8 film, and you are free to mix and match any of these looks to your desire. So we designed this to have them all off by default, and then to enable a node, all you have to do is either click the title, or you can click the number, or you can hit Command D on the keyboard. So this tungsten filter just warms up the footage, kind of like tungsten film. The split tone will add a bit of blue in the shadows and warm up the highlights to create a little bit of color contrast. The expired node kind of gives it more of an expired, washed out look. The faded node lifts the blacks and gives it more of a creamy feel. The punched node gives it just a little bit more contrast. And the daylight node is reminiscent of daylight balanced Super 8 film that looks a little bit blue more. So what we can do is we can apply multiple. So say I want to do the split tone, and then I'm going to try expired. And so those two I can preview on and off. And I kind of like that look. I like what it's doing to the footage. And so say I feel good about this look and I like the Canon 310 XL. I like what I've done in the corrections. So I can actually apply this to the next clip. So applying a look to the next clip is pretty simple. The easiest and fastest way to do this is to actually just go up to clips, click on that icon, and it'll bring up all of the clips in your timeline. So you want to go to the next clip, and all you have to do is right click on the clip that has the adjustments and click apply grade. Now that'll apply anything that we did on this clip to this next clip, and I'm going to hide those again. And you can see here that we've applied the same Super 8 looks to this footage. So on this clip, I think it might look really good a little bit warmer, so I'm going to enable the tungsten filter. And that's looking pretty awesome. We can scrub through and we can play it back and see if we like it. And it's looking pretty great. I'm going to go back up to clips and apply it to the next one. Since I don't want the tungsten filter, I'm just going to go to the first one, hit apply grade, and that's looking pretty good. I remember in our corrections we made it a little bit darker, so I'm just going to reset this node grade so that it goes back to not applying any adjustments. So say for this clip we wanted to try something different and see what the Minolta Auto Pack overscan looks like. So I'm just going to right click and apply grade to that one. And that's looking pretty awesome as well. You can play back and see that the Minolta Auto Pack is cool because it has this like side, you can see a little bit more around the sprocket. The other great thing is that you can actually adjust the pan of the footage. So say like with this off, this bird is right in the middle of the frame, but when I turn it on, he's a little bit to the left because of the matte. So all you have to do to adjust that is go over to your input sizing tab, and you can just adjust the pan in the input sizing tab. You want to make sure that you don't do it too far because then the footage will come out from under the matte. So you want to make sure that you're not pushing it too far, but you have a little bit of wiggle room to play with. And you can see that it's also adjusting the overscan on the top and bottom as I do this. So say that's pretty good, we're happy with that. And we'll just play it back here, and that looks great. So the next clip that we're going to apply it to is actually a clip that was shot in log on the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K. So this is an example of how we can use our log controls to bring the footage into Rec. 709. So I'm going to apply Canon 310 XL overscan to this footage. So in node number 3, log to 709, we're going to enable that node by hitting Command D, and then we're going to click on our Effects tab, and this will bring up the color space transform settings. So we know that the input color space was Blackmagic Design Wide Gamut Gen 4.5, and then we know that the input gamma, this was shot on the Blackmagic Design Pocket 6K film Gen 4 Gamma. So we can click that, and we can see now here that our footage is normalized to Rec. 709 because it's referencing our timeline color space and timeline gamma. So we can get rid of this effects tab now, and I feel like this footage is a little bit on the dark side right now. So if you want to adjust anything like exposure or white balance or anything like that, you want to enable your log offset node and go back to the color wheels, and you're going to use the offset tool to adjust those properties before the log to 709 conversion. So we can go to this node, and underneath our conversion, we can just push the offset up to make it brighter, and that looks pretty good. So with those two adjustments, we've converted it from log to Rec. 709 and made it a little bit brighter. Next, in our correction tab, I think it looks good, so we can bypass that, and then maybe we can play with some of the styles. So I'll turn on split tone and maybe punch, and then that's looking pretty good to me. So now we can scrub through the footage and just see what it looks like, and maybe we can play it back right here. So yeah, this clip is looking pretty good. I like how that looks, and it's got some really nice filmic Super 8 vibes. So our last clip is this one, and it was shot on the Fuji X-T3 in F-Log. And so I'm going to go to my gallery, and I'm just going to apply, let's do Canon 814 XL cropped. And you can see here that we've got our log footage. So I'm going to go to log to 709, and instead of using the color space transform, I'm just going to use a Fuji conversion LUT. And so I'm going to use the Fuji F-Log to 709 natural that was made by Lutco, and you can purchase it in the store. So I'm going to hit that, and that converts our log footage from F-Log Rec. 2020 to our timeline color space of Rec. 709. And so now if I want to do the offset, I might make it a little bit brighter. That's looking pretty good. And then let's try out faded and expired. I really like the expired style. So now we can play that back and see what it looks like. And we've got some nice grain. We've got the nice expired look and the washed out shadows and highlights. Another thing you can do if you really like one look and you just want to apply it across the entire timeline is go to your clips and say we just want to apply this first look to all of the clips in the timeline. All you have to do is highlight the clips that you want to apply it to, and then right click on the clip that you want to be applied and just hit apply grade and it'll apply it down the line. The only thing you need to remember is to add the color space transforms to the clips like we did before. The next thing that you might want to do to add a little bit of extra style to the footage is to add some overlays. So you'll see that the overlays are named based on overscan or full aperture. So since we have used an overscan version in here, we want to use the overscan version of the overlays. So I'm going to do the Canon 310 XL overscan Ultra HD, and I'm just going to drag that down on top of this first clip. And so this overlay has alpha built in, so we can just play it back right here, and you can see that it'll perfectly transition into the first clip. So I like how that's looking, and then I might add a little bit of a overlay going into the next clip. So I can zoom in here, and I'm just gonna drag down, let's try overlay 4. We'll drag that on top to cover the transition. And then these ones you need to set to screen mode. So I'm going to go to inspector and change the composite mode to screen. And so now if I play it back, you can see it adds a little bit of a flare to the side when it transitions. So you can put these anywhere you want, and they just help add a little bit of style to the footage and break up, yeah, they make it look a little bit more stylized and a little more engaging if you want it to have more character. Also, if you want to add sound effects, you could do that here. There's a whole sound effects library of buttons and leaders and door closing and the shutter running. So be sure to check those out too, and they're a really great way to add more character and realism to the Super 8 footage. So say we're happy with our edit, we're happy with all the presets, we're happy and we're ready to export. To do that, we're gonna go to the Deliver tab, and the best way to export your footage so you can use it in another project is to make a ProRes export, because then it'll have lossless quality if you export it again. So I'm gonna go to the ProRes 422HQ preset. I'm gonna make sure that it's set to HQ, resolution is 1920 by 1080. This is where you could also go into your project settings and change your timeline resolution to 3840 by 2860 Ultra HD. Hit save. And then you can see here that all of the presets have retained scaling and everything, but it's in a higher resolution for export. The grain and the mats were scanned at 4K, so you don't lose any quality there. So we're gonna go to ProRes HQ, and we're at 3840 by 2160 Ultra HD, frame rate is 18. In our advanced settings, you just wanna make sure you click force sizing to highest quality, force debayer to highest quality. And then we're just going to name it. So we'll call it Fake 8 footage, and find a location. We'll do it straight to the movies folder, add to render queue, and hit render all. And this is gonna render the Fake 8 footage in your timeline to the ProRes file for you to use in other projects. All right, so we have our video exported. All we have to do is right click here, hit reveal in Finder, and this is our Fake 8 footage. We can play it back and we can see the leader there is working, and now we have awesome Fake 8 footage from our digital footage. So I hope that gives you a good idea of how to import and use Fake 8 Film Lab in DaVinci Resolve. And I'm gonna send it back to John.
Now that you've seen how the Fake 8 Film Lab actually works, I'm excited to break down a couple of bonus tips for shooting to get the most realistic Fake 8 look. So the first tip is to set your frame rate at 24 frames per second in your camera, and to lower your shutter speed somewhere close to 1/40th of a second. The next tip is to avoid shallow depth of field, because few things sell out your Fake 8 look faster than a shallow depth of field that is very specific to a digital camera look. So you want to shoot at f8 or above. And if you're in low light situations, you can drop your aperture down. But f8 and above, especially in daylight, is going to help you maintain your shutter speed being close to 1/40th of a second. And it's also going to sell your look as Super 8. The next easy one is to turn off your autofocus. Digital autofocus is very apparent. And as long as you're at f10 and above easily, you should always be in focus or very close to it anyway. So turn on manual focus, and anytime that you need to focus, which you shouldn't be focusing terribly often when you're at high apertures, then it'll look much smoother and more natural, just like an 8mm camera. And finally, the best tip for last is, of course, using a zoom lens and throwing in some zooms on your footage. Now, you might be tempted to do it a little too often, but hey, that's part of Super 8. So throw on a zoom lens, zoom in while you're recording your footage. It's so fun. That's part of what makes Super 8 special. Go ahead and try that. And of course, you're always welcome to use a manual vintage lens as well. That might sell the look even more. If you feel like we may have missed anything in this video, please don't hesitate to check out the advanced user guide, which will walk you through using the full aperture version of the Fake 8 Film Lab, as well as installing and using the Fake 8mm, which are real Super 8mm assets inside of other softwares, along with some other useful tips that will really help you out in general workflow practice as you use the Fake 8 Film Lab. So with all of that said, the last thing we want to say is thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you for supporting us. We really, really appreciate it, and we're excited for you to use the Fake 8 Film Lab.